ready if you are.
On air, and welcome to the first episode of this series, the book club for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is a very absurd tale that we will be tackling probably more than one chapter at a time in the future because how short some of the chapters are. And, I don't know, hop around the galaxy with us. I guess I'll state out the whole premise of the book without spoiling anything. The whole point to the book is that the Earth is being destroyed. One of the people on it and a writer for a mass popular book in the galaxy, The Hitchhiker's Guide, hitch a ride off of it and then are just traveling around the galaxy for God knows why until the end. That's the general premise. Kind of a slight spoiler right there, but if you don't know that the Earth is being destroyed going into this book, you've probably never even heard of this book before. So who wants to break down the first chapter before we get into it?
Well, for starters, you totally spoiled the book for me because I had no idea that Earth was being destroyed. But that's okay, though. I've never read this book before. I'm really excited to get into it.
Okay. That's like the number one thing that everybody knows about the book is that the Earth is being destroyed. It happens very early on.
It even hints at it in the first chapter. I could break down the first chapter if we want.
Okay.
So starts out, we have a little introduction from about the actual book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is one of the best-selling books in, what was it, Ursa Major or something like that. And it's a book compiled from different writers from all over the galaxy about random bits. And so...
Well, they don't really go into that yet.
Well, I guess that's true.
They just say that it is a widely popular book.
Yes. And it mentions briefly this point that people on Earth are so upset about everything that they keep trying to find ways to get around being happy, and they pass around money and everything like that. And one time this girl comes up with the answer for how to make everything better. And then something happens that we are going to find out later. And the story is not actually about her, but jump to who the story is about. And we are introduced to Arthur Dent, who is waking up and feeling hungover and notices there's a bulldozer outside of his house. And he's kind of like, it's kind of odd, I don't know. And he's just getting about his day. And as he goes on and getting ready, then he finally realizes what he remembers why he was drunk last night is because he found out that they're going to bulldoze his house to make way for a bypass in his area. So he goes out, lays in front of the bulldozers to make sure that they don't come and destroy his home, because this is my home, why would you do that? And they argue over, oh, we actually put it up and you should have known about it. Oh, I didn't know about it. It's actually in the basement somewhere. And up comes along Ford Prefect, his friend, who... There's a little bit more to this character than meets the eye, and Arthur Dent doesn't know about. And he comes to Arthur and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." And he's looking nervously at the sky, and he's able to convince the people who bulldoze, "Hey, if you know, can I take him? Because you don't really need him here." And he's able to convince them that, oh well, we're really not going to get anything done anyway, so I can take my friend over and get a drink over here at the pub. And he's able to convince him, and that's about where the first chapter ends.
It's a bit long-winded, but
yeah,
yes,
probably.
Essentially. Yeah. And also, for warning, some of the stuff that you said at the beginning was likely due to the version that you had with the foreword, because the original version of the book starts at Arthur's house.
Oh, yeah, I have a special edition. It's actually the omnibus of all 5 of the trilogy,
yeah.
Which with special introductions and stuff like that. So I did not know. So sorry for the spoilers.
Well, no, it's not a spoiler, because it's just stuff that was added to the beginning. anybody know who might be reading the first chapter without a foreword or anything to it that the stuff you were saying wasn't crazy. It was just added to the beginning later on.
Yeah, I got mine from a dubious source. It looks like it's from game FAQs, so it's like everything's basically someone like copied everything into Notepad and just pasted it on the internet. But I mean, I kind of like at the beginning of the book how just Earth is like a really just bad place to live. Honestly, if I was an alien, I'd probably blow up Earth too. Just seeing how bad everyone treats each other. Like, personally, I don't think we're ever gonna get off this rock, you know. Because you ever thought about that? You know, just like the whole getting to Mars thing.
Oh no, I think we're getting off this rock. I just think that we're doing stupid things to delay this fact.
I don't know. Like, I think we're gonna like blow ourselves up before we do that. Like, it's almost like human nature, you know. Like, we just need one more big world war, and you know, everything's. I mean, think about it. I mean, we can't even secure funding for NASA, much less you know cooperate in space.
Well,
I mean,
there's actually a name for that thought. Is the it's the Fergie. What's the last word for it? I'm trying to remember. I think it's like the Fergie phenomena or something like that. Anyway,
like
so the whole point to it is that if we got to the point, start going out into the galaxy and start settling things, then we would not have been the only life form to do so. So it would be likely that we would have already ran into somebody else doing it, but our radio telescopes can't pick up any signs that anybody else has been doing this. So what we think is that there's a likelihood that species wipe themselves out before they get to the point that they can start colonizing. But it's a very loose theory standing as it is.
what was it called? Like, I think it's like called like the Fermi paradox or something.
Yeah, the Fermi paradox, that's it.
Yeah, I think the whole point of that is eventually you just get so advanced that either you're just to move beyond, like evolve beyond warfare, or we're just gonna like just blow ourselves up in time.
Maybe. I don't know. I think there's definitely more arguing against the Fermi paradox than there is arguing for it.
Really?
But there's pretty good points on both sides, especially judging that our rates of violence have gone down dramatically as civilization progresses. And even though we've been making bigger weapons, the fact that we've been making bigger weapons have made us less likely to use them on each other as well. Because we know that we get to a point of assured mutual destruction.
Like, some people say they're already in like another extinction event. So I think like even if we, I guess, you know, got rid of all the nukes and, you know, warfare, you know, ceased to exist, you know, like ecologically, climatically, you know, we're kind of screwed anyways.
Yeah, I think we just need to start doing scientific things because it's cool to do.
I know, that's why space.
Like, I hear a lot of people talking about that we need to go colonize Mars just in case there's some type of extinction level event here on Earth. But then you ask yourself, it's like, do you know how hard it is to colonize Mars? If we had the ability to make a substantial colony to make the human race progress, even if Earth got it wiped out, we would also be able to have the technology to prevent any extinction level event from happening to the Earth. So we shouldn't do things because we will need to do them. We should do them because they're cool. And I think a lot of what goes on in this book will speak to that same opinion too.
Yeah. Like, that's like a really noble ideal, but it's, you know, it's capitalism, man. It's, you know, you just follow the money. Like, right now there's no money in space. I mean, you know, maybe in the future we can like mine astronauts or, you know, like a space elevator kind of thing. But right now it's,
well, there's already some private companies that see the value of the asteroids in the belt and are trying to find ways where it would be cost effective for them to mine it.
Oh yeah, totally. I think like someone like not too. I was about to say Tupac. That's really dumb. I think someone like Snoop Dogg or like Miley Cyrus is like flying around the Earth or something like that, or going to the moon. You ever heard about that, like space tourism?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's something. But as far as like colonizing, there's no real push right now. I mean, think about like colonization back in 1500s and 1600s. You know, was for all for God, guns, and gold. You know, that kind of thing. But these days, unless they have some sort of people can make money off of it. I don't see it happening. I'd like to.
Well,
though.
they can make money off of it. In a single asteroid out in the belt, there is more nickel than the entire reserves of Earth.
Mm-hmm. And we really need to reorient our priorities. I mean, I'm not going to get political, but we should really, if that's one of our goals, then we should probably push a little harder in Congress to get that kind of funding. And it looks like we kind of went the opposite direction, but hopefully things will change.
Yeah, I honestly don't think it's going to come from government. I think private corporations are probably going to push it harder than people do, than the people do, the government and such.
And historically, that's the way it's gone. I think Virginia or something was founded by like private investors, and then later the crown comes along and basically kind of seizes the colonies. But I mean, that's
most of the colonies started that way. Georgia, New York at one point was, I think, New Dutchland or something like that. They were all just different business ventures that eventually became the way that they are now.
Oh, also another thing about the book that I kind of love is, you know, a lot of aspects of our lives, especially like they talk about the man on the cross. For a lot of people, it's like the defining thing in their lives. But I kind of like how the book takes a kind of a spectator view on it. And, you know, in the span of, like, in the scope of the universe, all that stuff is kind of just, you know, trivial. I actually want to say trivial, just peripheral, you know? Like, in the grand scheme of the earth, it's kind of like the Carl Sagan thing, you know, the pale blue dot.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like that's us, you know? All of our dreams, everything that we hold dear is just kind of hanging in space by thread. I thought that was really cool.
Well, yeah, even from the beginning, they talk about how insignificant the Earth is. Even from the very first chapter of like,
yeah,
because Ford,
or even just,
huh?
No, you keep going.
Because Ford is an alien here on Earth, and he's kind of seeing it as like, man, why do I have to be stuck here for 15 years?
On a place as dull as Earth is. But they do trivialize almost everything, like the narrator does when you talk about it. Like when they introduce Arthur's house, it's like, well, it's not particularly a nice house, but it is to Arthur because it just happens to be the one that he lives in, and starts trivializing like every little fact. Is like, well, it's not that special, but to him it's special because it's his life. And I think that's a big note that will carry on for the rest of the book, is that they will strike things down. It's like, well, there's nothing abnormally special about what's going on, but it's very impactful to this individual.
And even not on a global scale, but yeah, like his house, because even the people trying to bulldoze his house are like, let's just knock it down. And he's like, it's not that nice of a house, like you said. And they're like, but it's mine and I like it. So, but because then it takes it further up of like, these Earthlings, they still think digital watches are neat, you know?
When did this book come out anyways? Was it like the 80s or something?
I believe it's the 70s.
Yeah.
Let me see. I think it's in my thing of when it actually started out as a radio show. And then they asked him to write it down. The radio series began in 1978.
Because digital watches aren't that cool. I mean, maybe if they're like lamp speakers, which would be awesome to have.
So the book looked like it was written in 1979, so pretty close to the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah, the original copyright says 79.
Which, that's an interesting thing, too. My book had a foreword by Neil Gaiman and about Douglas Adams and an actual introduction from Douglas Adams. So it had a little bit of a backstory on how he even started the book and how he came up with the title for the book. And it's kind of funny because it plays into this whole thing that he sprinkles throughout his story.
Does anybody know his background? Like, who's Douglas Adams? Like, what's his thing? Is Hitchhiker's his only book?
No, he's written some other books. What is it? It was like, there's a paranormal and normal investigation one he did, like Dirk something. I forget the name of it, but he's written for screenplays. He's done a radio show. He's written at least 3 episodes of Doctor Who. So he had his hand in a lot of different things. And the way that the book came about was he wanted to write something involving science fiction and comedy. And he met someone else who wanted to do a radio show about science fiction and comedy. And so his idea was to do something about, they came up with 6 ideas for stories each week, and each of them ended with the Earth blowing up, the Earth ending. So the first story he came up with was, he was trying to reel it back of like, okay, if the Earth is going to be destroyed, and his first idea was for the Earth was going to be destroyed for bypass, hyperspace bypass in the radio show.
Yes,
And
which
so
they
like,
foreshadow in this chapter, that everything starts because of a bypass.
Yeah. So he came up with this idea, and he was like, okay, well, we want it from maybe from an alien's perspective, because if the Earth is going to be destroyed, who's telling the story? And that's where Ford Prefect came into being. And the idea for the name Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because he's like, okay, maybe Ford is writing for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the title for that came, I think, 6 years before that, when he was in Austria, and he was drunk, lying in a field, looking up at the stars. Something absurd had just happened to him, where he was trying to find a specific city or hotel or something like that, and he came up to someone and asked for directions. And even though he didn't know much German, he found out, oh, the reason that they can't explain this to me is because he's deaf and mute. So he goes looking for another person to explain it to him, like, well, where's this place? And turns out that person was deaf and mute. And so on and so on. He asked like 4 or 5 people, and all of them were deaf mute. One was deaf mute and blind. And he's just like, what in the world is going on? This is some next level crap here. And
almost
so
like being on another planet.
Yeah, so he goes and gets a drink because he's like, oh, I can't deal with this. And then he passes a hotel that has a convention going on for the deaf. But if he hadn't seen that hotel, like, just the absurdity of everybody I'm running into, what are the odds that everyone is deaf? So he's a little bit drunk, a little bit tipsy, lying in this field in Austria as a hitchhiker, and he has a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe. So he's just staring at the stars, drunk, and goes, you know, someone should write a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That would be interesting. And then he passes out and forgets about it for 6 years.
That's like a stoner thought, but that sounds awesome.
But I love how that, because it does translate into the book of the absurdity of everything just thrown about. And so when he was writing for the radio show, that's where this whole thing came into being. And someone had heard the radio show, and they came to him and said, we want this in book form. And even though Douglas Adams absolutely hated writing novels, he went ahead and did it, and now it's the much beloved novel we have today. Just a little backstory there.
And I think they came out with a movie too, didn't they?
They first came out with a 6-part, I think, for TV series. And then...
Because then they did like a Band of Brothers kind of like mini episode kind of thing.
Yeah.
That sounds like perfect for this
TV
book.
miniseries originally, but it was made in a way that you could put it together as a movie. And then back in like the late aughts, they also came out with a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy feature presentation.
Yeah, and I think in my little introduction, Douglas Adams was talking about how he had his hand in each thing. So there was the radio show, there was the book, there was a computer game that was based on it. There was the TV series, or for TV, mini series, and then the final movie that he had his hand in before he died, the more recent movie with like Martin Freeman.
That sounds like a really awesome idea for a video game, and kind of like an R.L. Stein. You ever read the Goosebumps books where kind of like you go off on tangents, and then like your character dies, you kind of like flip to see if he died, and you go back. You ever read those kind of books? Something like
Yeah.
almost like a mist kind of like video game, like part adventure, part like rogue type kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it was
kind of like a choose
yeah.
your own adventure that you could do over and over again in different ways.
Yeah. I think it said that the video game for Hitchhikers was text based, which I can imagine, but
I wonder if there's a new one. Let me check.
One of the important things to remember too, as they say, is that the writer of the book. He is a writer for the famous book. And one of the reasons to keep that in mind is because when you think, oh, you're a writer for a book, you think you're this like really intellectual person that knows a lot about the subjects. And you're like, okay, well, it's the galaxy. He's traveling it. He's writing the book. He should know a lot about it. But he's been stuck on Earth for the last 15 years. So he's not even particularly good at what he does. But he's a writer for the book in many ways that an individual journalist could be a writer for National Geographic. So
it's a component.
He's not the most competent person to be listening to, especially because he's drunk like all the time.
Person, you know?
Yeah,
you almost say, you know, being on Earth for that long, you know, he's almost like become an Earth person himself.
Yeah, but he still has this air about him of like, I'm not really interested, and he even keeps asking people like, I'm looking out for UFOs, and can you point me to the near, you know, how to get to Beetlejuice?
Yeah, but that's a human thing to do. It's like, you know, you change states or something, but you still follow your football team, you know. You don't remember where, you don't forget where you came from.
Well, and one interesting thing too about, because it's kind of hinted at in the first chapter that no one who's written the guide knows much about Earth, and it hints at he thought that cars were the dominant species on the planet, because that's why he chose the name Ford Prefect, which was a type of car.
Yeah.
And so even just the fact that he didn't know humans were the dominant life form, like what kind of, obviously he doesn't think very much of us, even though he becomes friends with one. But
if you saw these big metal things riding around the planet at all times and you weren't aware that they were actually a shuttlecraft, you might think that they were dominant too. Or if you're going by sheer numbers, you might think ants were the dominant species on the planet.
I always think it's funny in like other science fiction things besides this of like they don't seem as interested in the animals, and even when we come up with different sci-fi things, we don't normally come up with a whole zoology for each planet. Only a few times has that really been looked into.
Oh, like zoology for other planets or like for our own?
Well, for other planets, so you know, like. And
more
even
people are concerned about other planets' zoology than they are for our own zoology.
That was the thing I really appreciated, what like, because I noticed in Avatar how many little creatures that they came up with, and it was something I hadn't really noticed before. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But that.
Well, I think one of the big reasons has a lot to do with the change of media too. Because for the longest time, the way you would tell stories is by writing them down, or even before that, retelling them to people orally. So you try to get rid of as much like superfluous information as you can, the important stuff. So a lot of just small critters running around may not be important. You might say, oh, and there were small critters around, or something poetically brilliant along those manner, but that would just be like a little segue into what's actually going on. But now that we're in a lot more visual mediums like movies, video games, and stuff like that, it is necessary to fill the world so they feel more organic, like the actual world is.
And honestly, I feel like a lot of these, like the big books, like I haven't read Hitchhikers, but like books like War of the Worlds, usually just humans and Martians or aliens, you know, that's enough. And usually get enough just dynamics between the humans. Usually these sci-fi books seem to be more about humans than about aliens. I love the alien parts, but it's usually like the dynamic of, I guess, like humans being more alien than the aliens. That's usually what I get from these kinds of books.
Yeah, Yeah, well, one thing without spoiling anything, is just more of the nature of how the book is written, that it will be really good going into later, is that they treat the other aliens like humans to an extent. They treat them like they're people, but they also treat everything like it's foreign. So even if there's like something that would be shared in their culture that we develop too, they'll re-explain it as if you weren't aware that that was something that's part of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, makes sense.
Because a
this is
sapient
Hitchhiker's
life
Guide to
would
the Galaxy.
probably have more in common than not.
Well, this is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I mean, didn't they say this supplants the Encyclopedia Galactica? I mean, I don't know what that is, but wait, I lost my train of thought. Never mind.
Yeah, no, there will be a reference later, and they put that in the movies and stuff, is there was an Encyclopedia Galactica, and it was just too Encyclopedia Britannica, you know, it was just way too confusingly worded for the average person to understand. And the Hitchhiker's Guide is basically like anything you want to know, but the For Dummies series of it.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody could understand this guide.
Yeah.
So it's like the
Having it
of the galaxy.
Well, I think it's even interesting the human that they're choosing to focus on, Arthur Dent, because he's supposed to be like the normal person. I think it was in Neil Gaiman's introduction in my version of the book, he mentioned that Douglas Adams first, when he thought of a person like Arthur Dent, he named him Alaric B. And he crossed that out and chose Arthur Dent. And so Neil Gaiman was talking about how that name is a normal name for a normal man. Because I even looked up, like, well, what does even Alaric mean? And it's an all-powerful ruler, which is not how Arthur Dent is portrayed at all.
Well, in many ways, Arthur Dent, if you know about the person, is kind of an indirect self-insert.
Yeah, it even mentions that he works in radio, which Douglas Adams was.
Very normal, somewhat tall, dark-haired man who drinks when he finds that there's a problem and complains about everything. He's pretty much Adams to the T.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was like this normal portrayal, but also the author put a lot of himself into it. Which, I mean, if he came up when he was drunk of like, oh, someone needs to write a Hitchhiker's Guide because I want to go out and see the galaxy, obviously he would write himself into the book.
I think that's how the best novels are written, you know? Like even like Stephen King, you know, even in Stephen King's books, you always see these really dark characters, but like, for example, like Misery at the time, like he was kind of that person, you know, he was hooked for a long time, and I just think the best novels are written that way, because you almost like speak from the heart, if you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, you can flesh a character out more if it's based off of you, because you know yourself better than you know other people. So you would know what you would do in that situation, which is why I don't complain. There's this common like stigma on the internet for self-inserts, and I think the main reason is this trope called the Mary Sue, where people put themselves into a circumstance and then they can just solve any problem for any reason whatsoever. And it just doesn't follow like the internal logic of the story or anything like that either.
Really? Can you like give an example?
It's a of a Mary Sue. Off the top of my head, here's one. If you've ever seen Star Trek Generation, new writers were coming on, and there was a character named, and Wesley was actually kind of like one of the new writers. And for some reason, Wesley, being this young kid who's had no experience in anything, was just like magically problems because he's a genius. And he's like, okay, yeah, he's a genius. That's believable, but he's still a young kid. So experience there. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you know everything. It just means you learn faster than other people do. And because of that, there was a big turnoff to the character of Wesley, because it just didn't make sense that this little kid was solving everybody's problems, and they wrote him out of the story after like the second season.
So how did the story end? Did they kill him off, or did he go?
No, they sent him to Starfleet Academy. They just made him older and sent him away.
Well, that's kind of different with Arthur Dent. I don't see as like a Mary Sue
Yeah.
because he's just kind of like along for the ride.
He's just a very natural self-insert, and he doesn't even solve most of the problems. Most of the time, he's a bystander in his own story.
He's just watching everything like, what? Because, I mean, that'll be later on, but even just now, he's so focused on, I don't want my house to be demolished. And Ford's trying to, I have this big thing I need to talk to you about. I need to tell you. But he's so, like, narrow-minded of, no, I'm focusing on this problem first. There's nothing like really that intriguing about him that we learn about from the beginning. It's just, oh, he's got a house that's about to be knocked down. That's about all we know.
Right. And he's in a hangover, but even the way like he's describing his life and everything, it's almost like he's in a perpetual state of being in a hangover. It's like, okay, I'm doing my morning routine. Hey, there's something there. Whatever. I'm doing my morning routine. I see another thing that's the same there. Finally, I get to the point where it's flashing in my head enough. It's like, oh my God, I remembered why I was so angry last night. As opposed to Ford, who, again, isn't the most competent person, but he's a very experienced person being a traveler. And I really like how he solved the problem with the bulldozer. He kind of pulled like a Bugs Bunny.
Yeah. Well, like, because Mr. Prosser, he was the one who was making sure that the house got bulldozed. And even he doesn't, like, he's not that smart. I mean, when Arthur asked him, like, well, why do you have to build a bypass? And he's like, you gotta build bypasses. It's just my job. So that Ford's able to use, like, a very, very fallacy-filled idea to implant into him of, like, how to get Arthur away. It's just those stupidity. Well, when I was reading it, is more like Ford knows that humans are stupid and he exploits it. Because even if he's not that competent, he's still an alien and he knows more than Earthlings do because we're just so consumed with our own happiness and trying to get there that we miss the bigger picture. Which even if Ford isn't that, like, yet we don't know how competent he is as an alien. We just know he's an alien.
No, we just know that he also does some pretty stupid things in life, like get really, really drunk, curl up in corners, and start telling people things that he normally would keep under the wraps. And
of course, no one believes
choosing a name that just doesn't make sense for a normal person to have for a name.
I love how they describe Ford. It's almost like it's almost stereotypical for like sci-fi. It's almost like the green thin man, you know what I'm talking about? Like super thin, super tall. The guy looks like it almost looks like an alien could like crawl out of him at any second, you know?
Yeah.
Just the way he describes his characters in this book it's very bare bones, but it paints a really good picture.
Because what I get from it, because they make him seem uncanny is the word I would use for it.
Yeah.
Because everything to describe, he is very human, yet there's subtle things about him that are kind of just like not human at the same time. Like you say, well, he's not conspicuously tall, so you can assume that he's probably shorter than Arthur, since Arthur's key feature is he's tall. Short, because they would have called him short otherwise. And he's got like red-ish hair, but not fully red hair if it's described as something being like reddish. And his skin seems to kind of just pull back from his nose. Now that's something that, unless you're like a really old person who's had some type of, I don't know, job where you have to lie down a lot so your skin would sag in that direction, it's not something that's very common to be in a human. But at the same time, it's not so weird that it draws too much attention to the average person. He's very same way that if we were to make a robot like a human and give it flesh, we would know just staring at it, it's like, that's supposed to be human, but it's not quite.
Yeah, I like that they even mention he doesn't blink that often, and so people's eyes start watering for him. And then they doesn't he describe himself as like an out of job actor?
Yeah, he's an out of work actor. Which
everyone's
again,
just like, oh, that's plausible.
Yeah. You know, there's plenty of actors who are out of work for 15 years. It's a hard industry, and most people aren't that talented, but they stick with it anyway.
Hmm.
I just think it's funny that, well, he does have like 15 years to try and integrate, well, until he can find a way off, but that he comes here not knowing really anything, because it kind of makes it sound like there aren't not much known about Earth in the guide or anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if he's writing for the guide, he'd be coming here to write about Earth.
Yeah.
But, you know, it even says he didn't do his research. So what that implies is,
yeah, that's true.
He did not know that we weren't able to get people back off of Earth once they're on there. So he's stuck unless he somewhere. He didn't know what the dominant species of the planet is, which is why he picked his name the way he did.
Mhm.
And he also just isn't aware of customs or anything, and basically had to do all the research he could on the fly once he got here, which is why he picked his name. And I'm an out of work actor, because that's a plausible thing. It's he's very base level. I got this job, I'm jumping into it.
I don't get how that would like work on a day-to-day basis. Like, if you're out of work for 15 years, how do you support yourself? Like, what do you do? You like conjure like your Martian money and then like go to Walmart and, you know, buy food with it? You never actually showed like how he actually lives his life. It'd be pretty. That sounds like a really fun spin-off. Like,
I assume mostly for residency, he probably couch surfs. Somebody who is drunk almost every single night.
so,
But he
basically,
has to be able to afford to drink, so he has to be making some level of money.
I'm not sure where to go from here.
Yeah, no, it has to, like, you think about it, say, well, how did he even get his startup capital? Because if they didn't know much about Earth and he didn't know much about Earth, it's not like he showed up here with Earth money. Like you were saying, like if he's from Beetlejuice or whatever, he didn't have anything. Maybe he came with a gem or something that he could have traded at a pawn shop, but like, I forget if they explain any of this stuff later, because there's a lot of just like snippets of throughout the book, but it is confusing. Like, well, how did he survive
Yeah.
for 15 years drinking all the time and not having an actual stable job?
I feel like they'd be a great show, like a Martian coming to Earth and then like figuring out how like use the toilet, and then just like give up on everything. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna drink for the next 15 years. And because he's an alien, he's just like drinking these ungodly amounts. So he's just sitting at the bar, you know, and people are trying to keep up with him, you know, and then just at the end of the night, just bodies all over the floor, and he's just like, yeah, I'm just doing my thing, you know.
And I also like how they when they're talking about how he is kind of bending Arthur's will while he's laying down to kind of convince him to go to the pub, they actually explain the whole game as why he got so good at bending people's will. And it's not because, I'm some alien with power naturally, or I'm a talented person. It's, I developed this over many, many times of going into this really dumb bar game with probably even the intention of losing, but the amount of ability I have is just, you know, a byproduct of going into this game so many times.
Yeah.
Like, almost the dumbest way to develop an ability, but a very logical one, because you look at it, it's like, well, there's some people who have really good accuracy even while inebriated for no reason. And you find out it's like, oh, because they've played like 1,000 games of beer pong.
Mm-hmm. That's like a really fine line, though. Like, it'd be like 1 or 2 drinks, and then after that, I think it's like science or something. You know, like after like 3 drinks, just your coordination just like goes like way down. But like 1 or 2 is the sweet spot.
Yeah. Well, it also depends, because there are different parts of your brain that deal with coordination, and the entirety of it, it's called the motor complex, and your active ability to coordinate is heavily impaired the more you drink. But the stuff that you like really dig in, the muscle memory, because your brain isn't just in your head, it's your whole nervous system throughout your body. Anything that's just like really ingrained into your nervous system will still function while you're inebriated. The problem may be it just may not function the way you want it to. Which is why there have even been problems where like longtime martial artists, when they get drunk, accidentally hurt people because they don't have full control over who they are, and then somebody like taps them on the shoulder and they hit them square in the solar plex or something. It's like everything functions, just not the way you're telling it to because it's impaired.
So I'm not really sure where to go from this, but I'm really excited how this is going. Like a lot of these sci-fi books, it seems like they're more of like grand dramas, almost like epics, you know. But this feels more like a down to earth because it seems more down to earth and something you can relate to.
Which is ironic.
It feels like you can like dig your teeth into
down to
earth. Yeah, but Earthbound, yeah. But yeah, it's all my willpower not to dig through this book right now. I could, but just bite by bite, you know. I don't know.
Totally could. Though
I totally could, but it's almost like you're thinking like too much of it, you know. You have to like almost savor it. It's almost like getting in the bathtub. You have to like dip your toes in little by little, and then like you slide yourself in, you know. But just going in all at once, I think you kind of like miss the point of it, just enjoying it.
Well, and you also have the advantage in one way, because even though I've read the book before, and I've done a couple things throughout this program, but I've tried hard not to, is I really don't want to reference things that are happening later in the book, except for the synopsis of the whole book at the beginning, because I don't want to spoil it too much for the people who might be reading along with us following the show. And you don't have that problem because you don't know what's going to happen yet.
Did you guys read this in school? Because I didn't.
No, I actually read it recreationally a long time ago.
I read it for fun a few years ago. I think I read it before that, but I picked it up again.
I like to see more sci-fi books or just like high fantasy books get included in just material for school. Like you always get the same stuff in like Huck Finn. That book, like old books like that, but something that like sparks the creative senses, or something a little more down to earth, like Harry Potter. Like I don't know if kids are reading Harry Potter in school these days, but
yeah, the main book I liked when I was in high school was The Giver, because that was a little more interesting to me. But I read recreationally all the time. So my dad is a big fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he introduced me to the show that was out in like the 80s or something, and I watched half of that because that's all we had on VHS, and then I really enjoyed the movie, so why not read the books? And I've read 5 of the trilogy.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons why this should be one of the books that start getting incorporated, and one of the things I really hate about how our school system is designed, is that we only read books in whatever like English language arts class there is, which you're like, okay, well, that makes sense that you'd be reading books there. But our classes are very like broken up when you think about it. And there are some other like almost elective but still mandatory classes you have to take. Like you have to take sociology and psychology for a semester each in high school. And if psychology was a class that you had to take more than 1 year in a row, you could get into it deeper. Because for some reason, psychology only deals with like the bare minimum of the medical side of psychology, when the vast majority of psychology is philosophical. Even most of the best modern day philosophers were practicing psychologists and psychiatrists. And this book would be great for a psychology course because almost 1-to-1 do the principles of the book match up with Camus' work in absurdism.
Well, you're talking about, I just bought the book like a couple of days ago. I haven't had a chance to read it. It's Camus' book. Help me out here. What's that one called? It's like super thin. Help me out here.
He's written quite a few things, so I'm gonna need a little bit more than that.
I literally just bought this book. It was like $2 at Half Price Books. Stranger, that's it. Yeah, The
Yeah,
Stranger.
that's one of his more popular ones.
But I really like that idea. So, like what you're saying, like books that may not have to do directly with, like, let's say sociology, but with the repercussions or just like creative exploring of like sociology. For example, like if you're talking about sociology and population control, maybe like Brave New World, something
Yeah,
like that.
Brave New World in high school, but it seems like something that would be less important to be reading in English class and more important for either sociology or psychology, depending on what you're talking about. And the problem is, aside from the hard maths and sciences, all the other subjects are more interscholastic than we give them merit for, and we just like cut them up and don't have them bleed over.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people assume that, you know, like math or like science has no, well, not science, but just like these subjects really don't have much. They really don't deal with the real world. But if you're like including books about space,
Yeah.
maybe we have more students interested in the sciences, and but just my just interested. I don't know.
Well, and that would be another solution I would have, because a lot of people hate reading, but I think it's more of the way that they're forced to read. It's not in a very good and productive way. What I would do is I would get rid of homework in schools. Like I would just leave all the problem solving and stuff to the classes and the tests. And my assigned homework would be some type of literature for you to read at home that has to do with what you're doing. That way you can expand the knowledge. And if you give them a good window, they can break it up as like, well, I've got 7 courses and I've got these 4 books that I need to read right now, one each chapter a week. I can read a chapter this night. I can read a chapter of that book this night. I can read a chapter of that book this night. It'd be really easy to break down, not too long of homework. By putting the literature as your homework, you don't have to take up school time, and you can focus more on the hard principles of like applied problem solving in the subject, where the teacher's actually there to help you. For example, you could put space-related books in a science class. You could put physics-related books, things that are easier to understand. You could put one of Isaac Newton's books as required reading in a physics class. His stuff, they're older, but there's modern day translations of them that you can still read, that they're really easy for the average person to understand. And he wrote them that way on purpose. It's just most people can't understand because they read a classic version of the book that's written in a older form of modern English. Or even
Oh, go ahead.
there's some books that you can read in math class too that talk about principles in different ways. And it's a good way of making knowledge more interscholastic, and it'll stick in people's head better.
Exactly, and that's a good jumping off point because people learn differently. I tend to be a visual learner. I also like to read a lot, and you know, people talk a lot about changing the school system because different learning styles. So why is all our homework in written form, or why are we only learning from books? I mean, you just like off the top of my head, you know, whoever played like Carmen Sandiego as a kid, or the Oregon Trail, or even like Age of Empires, you know, like, those games were like chock full of geography, um, you know, history, that kind of thing. You know, if we could like not even just use books, we could use like video games or media as not so much homework, but extracurricular.
Basically supplemental learning.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Just
I had
anything that can supplement it.
Yeah, I had a different high school experience because I personally was homeschooled from 4th grade on, and I still remember in like 3rd and 4th grade, like whenever you got a book from the library, they would force you to do a little test afterwards, and I hated those because it was always stuff like what color was this person's sweater or something like that, and it's like that's not what the book is about. And the questions that the questions that they asked, huh?
Did you get like points for those AR tests? Like I remember that.
Yeah, you would get like points or something like that, and so I always hated those because like if I read say a little kid's book like what Boxcar Children or something like that, then they asked like what was her sweater color in this chapter? I was like, I don't remember that. I remember the plot of the book, and I remember what they talked, you know, like give me actual questions. And so I would always I was a higher reading level anyway, and I would always choose the books that actually talked about science or something like that. And that was
Oh,
like,
same.
yeah, because then the questions actually were stuff you remember. Because if you're reading a science book, it's all going to be like science related.
I would read those little blue books about different like species of animals and stuff like that, and they only gave you like 10 points
Oh,
a
yeah,
piece. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, it
I-
wasn't exactly
Stickers,
zoo
yeah.
books, but it was like another thing that they had there,
Yeah, there was
and they
there
only
was
gave you 10
one.
points a piece.
Mhm.
But
I don't know,
so
but
I would
that
just go and I'd read like 6 weeks and just knock out the tests that I needed to do, and I would just like absorb all this random information about animals. It's like, well, this seems like the most productive way to spend the time that I have to be reading anyway.
Yeah, I think I mixed it in with probably some fiction, but there was a specific series of science books for kids that I liked, and even though it was like a grade below my average, it was still science. But that I've always loved reading, even when I was little, but that suppressed it until I was homeschooled. And then I rediscovered my love of learning anyway. Because when you're homeschooled, at least the way we did it, when we were in high school anyway, is our mom told us, okay, this is what you're doing, but she let us do it ourselves. So we basically taught ourselves by reading. So for like math or something, you would do the curriculum, but for everything else, we had books we would just read. And some of them were fiction. And she would choose which ones based on like maybe what high schools are reading, but she would choose them and, okay, you're going to read this many chapters a day. But because we were forced to learn ourselves and not have to be like, our homework was our main work. But it gave me more of a love of learning in general anyway. And now I have like over like 1,000 books just in my room alone. There's probably like 3,000 books in our whole house. Because one thing about homeschoolers is you accumulate so many books.
But you got 1,000 books in your house?
No, 1,000 books in my room alone.
Wow.
We probably have about 3,000 in the whole house, because my dad has always loved reading, and so he kind of, both him and my mom imparted that to me. If he would go to the library and bring a whole wagon full of books home from the library. So that's why I'm really interested in this going forward, because I have always had that love of learning.
Yeah, I've had the opposite approach because I've been basically living out of basically a rucksack for the last 6 years. So basically, I maybe own maybe like 5 books or something. I'm always like at the library. I'm like one of those homeless kids that hangs out at Walmart. You know, I just sit in the corner and like I try to read. You know, I think the last one I was reading it was the new Thrawn book, the new Star Wars book by Timothy Zahn.
Oh.
My God, so good. The guy's a master at science fiction. Like I haven't read anything else by him, but his stuff even date back to the 90s. But wait, that's not a tangent. Anyways, but I love science fiction. I can't wait to get through this book. It's taking everything I can not to like just speed through the book. I might do it anyways. I might lie. Don't tell anybody. But I can't wait for the rest of the segment.
Yeah, I mean, you've always been a pretty heavy reader, though.
You know, I was, and I did a lot of writing, and then
Yeah.
I basically started playing a ton of video games. But ever since I stopped really playing video games, I started writing music. I started, playing music. I'm getting a lot more into reading, and this is one of the things that has helped me. So, I mean, I got to hand it to you, man. I really appreciate you having this book club and getting me back into reading.
Yeah, no, it was just like a random fun idea I had one night. It's like, you know what would be really cool? I should run a book club on YouTube. And then the very like next morning when I got up, I started writing up the thing about it.
Well, that's one thing I'm always sad about, hearing the statistics of people who don't read after high school. We need to really get into that love of learning again, because you should always be learning, and books are one of the gateways. Even fiction books like this one. And one of the reasons I like this book is not only does it have the philosophical every bits, but it's funny.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that's how you stay
Speaking
young.
of funny,
It's hilarious.
I really think
there's probably going to be some conversations later
No,
on
go
once
ahead,
we
dude.
find out who the president is. Some very similarities between the president in this book and the current one we have in the United States.
I can see that. I can see that. Yeah. There'll be
So
some
that's going
interesting,
to be fun to get to.
interesting conversations. Yeah.
What were you going to say before?
Who?
Oh. I got no idea, man. I'm kind of tapped out right now.
Yeah, I mean, this has about been the time. There was a few other things that I could have brought up, but mostly they were just smaller notes that we could have talked about to fill up the time. But because we already filled it, I think we're probably pretty good.
And if it's what I think it is, it'll probably crop up again.
Most of it was just about like what we were talking before we all hopped on and stuff. Just about how the little things that get mentioned as a way to kind of fool you into thinking things are important when there's things that just aren't important.
Yeah.
But we are going to see a lot more of that, so we can probably actually dive deeper into that in the very next episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, brother. What's the what are we doing? Chapters 2 and 3 next episode?
Yes. Next week we are going to be covering both chapters 2 and 3 because chapter 2 is really short.
Yeah, that's one thing
And
about
3,
this book. It's just a lot of short chapters.
About the same length as chapter 1, so it wouldn't be bad to add 2 to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that the way that he recorded the radio shows? Just chapter 2 is just really short or something?
I think oh, sorry. I think the radio shows were like. I think the radio shows were more like each episode was its own entity. If I was reading it right.
Yeah, they're completely disconnected.
Yeah.
From what we're going over right now, and they kind of just spawned what we're going over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kind of like in the same way that SNL spawned the Blues Brothers movie, but even the Blues Brothers sketches in it have almost nothing to do with the Blues Brothers movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, chapters 2 and 3. Even then, being slightly longer by adding basically a half chapter onto it will give us plenty more to talk about because those are the chapters where the main setup of the rest of the book really take place. So that'll be really engaging and fun.
This is just the basic setup. Get ready, Aaron. Get ready.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much it. So anybody watching, be prepared. Or if you're watching this way in the past, I'll probably have some type of thing you can click that'll send you to the next episode. Lord, or anything like that. So, see ya.